These stories are first-hand accounts shared by Reddit users, detailing unsettling real-life encounters that left lasting impressions. Each narrative provides a chilling glimpse into moments of danger, survival, and eerie coincidences that might make you rethink your surroundings. Disclaimer: these accounts were originally published by Reddit users and are presented as personal experiences. While they are described as true events, their accuracy relies on the original storytellers. The details shared here are intended for awareness and cautionary purposes only. Viewer discretion is advised. Story 1. I work at a museum. There's a pedestal that's always empty, and its plaque says "Do not look when occupied." It's no secret that, when in need of money, someone is willing to go to extreme lengths. I'm not morally corrupt enough to murder, but I was still desperate to do things close to that. The divorce had been hard on me, and I wanted to get out of that house and just live on my own. For that, you need green, and my job wasn't paying enough for me to just wander off and change my address so quickly. In retrospect, maybe it wasn't so wise to look for a job on the dark web. Those pay the most, though, and I didn't want to spend my time caring for some kid or old lady, only to get paid $10 an hour. I started browsing whatever forum I could find, and filter my search so that I wouldn't have to kill anyone or sleep with anyone. After a while, I came across offerings of package deliveries and such things. Deliver this to this address, show up to this house, etc., etc. It was all right by me, but I didn't have a car, and I couldn't just walk for miles with suspicious boxes in hand. I finally came across this listing. Museum worker needed, $100 per hour, temporary exhibition hosted somewhere in the suburbs. I checked the address on Google Maps and found some abandoned warehouses at the edge of town. I'd driven by it a few times back when the family car was also my car. I thought I could give it a try. Maybe it was some contemporary art stuff, some voodoo statues, or curse items. I didn't believe in any of that, so it really wasn't a problem to me. It said I had to be there during the week from 11 a.m. to 5 p.m., and Sundays were off. The exhibition would run for around 3 months. I quickly added up some numbers: $100 an hour for 6 hours a day, for 6 days a week, for 3 months. That would certainly cover for a deposit and some secondhand car, I figured. That would be enough to help me get by. I ran through the possibilities of weird implications this ad might have. Maybe the museum was a front for human trafficking, drug dealing, or other illegal things. I don't even know why I said that. That was surely the case. I just had to be careful and not look into things too much. Or maybe the exhibition was hosted by some eccentric millionaire who wanted to display his dubious antiques. Either way, $100 is $100. I replied and got an instant response. Next thing I know, I was hired. With the little money that I had, I bought a bike and some headphones to help pass the time. I arrived at the warehouse one Monday at 10 a.m., eager to get the job started and get my money. I wasn't expecting it to be so empty. The warehouse was huge on the inside, but the items displayed were very few. Mostly paintings covering the walls and some wooden statues, extremely tall. They almost reached the ceiling of the warehouse, and I couldn't really see their faces. All of them were sort of bent down, almost as if they were giants watching so as not to step on us. Some notebooks were on display, too. Most of them had drawings or scribbles. They weren't extraordinary. I really couldn't tell what I was looking at. I saw some unknown surgical equipment. It looked almost medieval. Next to it, a pair of ordinary scissors. I thought at first that it was ironic or just a piece of art, but the washed-out lady that had led me in there told me that those particular scissors were authentic and extremely important. I couldn't really tell what age the lady was. She was Asian, her skin clear and luminous. Based solely off that, I could have guessed she was in her teens, but her eyes moved around a lot and had a certain darkness that you only gain with age. Contrasting to her face, her hands were wrinkled and stained. Her hair fell in long threads on her back and was tangled towards the end. It looked unwashed. The most interesting part consisted in the last 3 items, displayed on the opposing wall to the entrance. If I sat at my desk, near the entrance, the wall was almost invisible, hidden in shadows. I didn't understand why the lights were so dim. The lady explained that it contributed to the atmosphere of the exhibition. One of the items was a low, round wooden table. The plaque in front of it read the hunger. The table was chewed and clawed at the edges. I think it used to be square, but the wood had been bitten off and chewed to the point where the corners were rounded. The teeth marks on the table were human. I figured it must have been some art piece. The other item was a pair of shoes. The plaque read the shoes that walked home. They were old, made of leather, and worn out in impossible places, as if whoever had worn them had walked in circles continuously. The last item was an empty pedestal. Its plaque read, "Painter, do not look when occupied." I stared at it for a while. Such an interesting concept, I mumbled, noticing the lady's unblinking gaze on me. "Yes," she replied. "Don't look when it's occupied, though." "How would I know, Dash?" "You'll see. It's a really easy job. You don't have a lot of duties, and you earn so much money by basically doing nothing. You must understand we value your discretion and lack of curiosity the most." "Yes, thanks," I responded quickly. Suddenly, I realized I didn't really want her to leave. That didn't stop her from traversing the warehouse and shutting the door behind her, without any other formalities. I was left alone with the art. My job was to sit at the desk and greet visitors, sell them tickets. I noticed that the stack of tickets was relatively small. They didn't really expect visitors. As I imagined, the warehouse was at the edge of town, and nothing really promoted this exhibition. No one was going to come. I decided I would put on some music and study the paintings. I got up and moved in front of the first, titled My Mother. It showed a beautiful sea landscape, the crystal waves melting into the bright shore. It was the type of scenery you'd find before a storm, so bright and yet ominous, as if it knew what awaited. I couldn't find any trace of a woman, though. Right when I was about to move to the next painting, my neck tensed up. It's impossible to describe it. The sudden, alarming urge to run. The panic that builds up in your chest. I was afraid to turn around, and yet I hated having my back turned to the room. I took a deep breath. "I'll count to 3. 1, 2, 3. I didn't turn around. I kept locking eyes with my mother, afraid to act on the impulse of running back to my desk. After torturous moments where my heart was threatening to jump out of my chest, I did a swift turn and then plunged back to my desk. "Phew," I said out loud. "This place is creepy as fuck." "Why?" "Because. I don't know, it's just fucking odd. I wouldn't pay money to come here." My throat was so dry it was itching. In the cold air, drops of sweat began gathering on my forehead. My eyes darted to various points of the room. To the paintings. To the statues. To its corners. Who had I spoken to? Who even was that? I stared at the closed entrance door. "Who is that?" I got no answer. "Fuck off. Just answer me. I heard you loud and clear. I know that someone is in here." "You have to," I began hopelessly. "You have to buy a ticket to get in." I heard a clatter in the back of the warehouse. The hunger. The shoes that walked home. The painter. Did the pedestal refer to the one who had made the paintings? I stood up and made my way slowly to the back. I kept looking at the floor until I saw the edges of the hunger. In the dim light, I could make out the shadow of the pedestal, and on it, I saw the shadow of a figure. It looked humanoid, like someone crouched over. I couldn't tell which direction it was facing. I was so cold. I stepped back, slowly the way I came. At last, after what felt like billions of years, I sat down on my chair. I spent the remaining time of my shift there, too disturbed to listen to music. At some point, I heard the faint sound of wet footsteps coming from the back. You know, when you're little and you begin recognizing the walk of your family members as they're coming up the stairs, how can you distinguish between your younger brother's upbeat walk and your father's slow, heavy steps? These footsteps sounded as if those two patterns were combined, almost like limping. They went on for a few seconds, then faded without reaching a certain destination. I swore to myself that I would quit the next day. However, when I saw the bank transfer that night, I thought it wasn't really a bad job. It's not like I was being chased around or hurt in any way. I just had to sit down. I dreamt, however, of those footsteps reaching me at last. It's Tuesday, and as I'm writing this, I can hear them faintly in the back. I just hope that they appreciate my discretion. I wonder if the hunger and the shoes that walked home are connected in some way, but they don't pay me to be curious. Story 2. My family had one rule: never raise your voice at home. I'm sure at least some people will be able to relate to this. My childhood was odd. At the time, I couldn't see that there was anything wrong with it. I couldn't understand it when things happened that weren't normal. I went to school, had friends, and played games like any other kid. I had loving parents and an annoying sister, just like many other kids my age did. My grandparents, aunts, and uncles would often visit. I didn't like when my grandmother came. She was a strict woman, and honestly, she scared me. I can remember vividly one summer she came over. She looked my sister and I up and down, then turned to my father and asked, "What about the other one? I thought you said get it over with and end this farce." He pulled her aside and told my sister and I to go play outside. She left that night and never came to visit again. There were so many things that I never learned that should be questioned. I never comprehended that they were something I should question. Most of them felt small at the time. We had a picture of our family tree in our hallway, a long line of sibling pairs as far back as anyone remembered. And yet each of them was space for a third. My mother would bring in extra groceries every trip and sometimes set an extra plate at dinner, then quietly put it away again. But there was one rule that we were never to break. We weren't allowed to speak at home. Rather, we weren't allowed to raise our voices above a whisper. Whether in anger, laughter, or even by accident, loudness in general was treated as taboo as soon as we set foot on the driveway. On a few occasions we raised our voices. Our father's anger always fell hardest on me. My sister cried, but she was spared. I didn't understand why my mother never comforted either of us until much later, and it cost me far more than I would have been willing to trade. I really want to emphasize that this was always the norm to me. I didn't understand what it meant. I didn't know I should be worried or scared. Despite this, like I mentioned earlier, I did have a good childhood. My parents truly loved us both, and it was rare that we got into trouble. I had a lot of friends at school, and I'd often spend the majority of my day at one of their houses, playing PS2 or taking advantage of their trampoline, which I had always been envious of. My dad didn't like it. Anytime I wanted to get permission for a play date or a sleepover, I would ask my mom. This would be followed by tense, coarse whispers between the two of them in their room. Sometimes they'd let me, other times not. Hindsight truly is a taunting thing. I can't tell you how many nights I've spent laying awake wishing my dad had won those hushed arguments. I wish to myself as I toss and turn that I hadn't been born to my parents, that I hadn't been born at all. But even more vicious than hindsight is the past itself. It stands with absolute resoluteness, is unchangeable and unforgettable, a wound that never heals until the day the afflicted passes away. Siblings are supposed to be mean to each other when they're young. It's part of how they grow up, how they learn social skills. So when my friend suggested that we scare my sister during a sleepover, I was immediately on board. I wasn't allowed to have friends over at our house, but I told them I could record it all and show them the next day. I was beyond excited to have something to rub on my sister's face. She was the eldest, and I wanted to get the upper hand on her for once. As any little girl would, she screamed when she saw the rubber snake under her pillow. It wasn't a long scream. She covered her mouth with her hands almost as soon as it left her lips, but it was enough. There was a moment of silence right after she screamed that felt never-ending. Then my parents ran into the room. They saw her, mouth still covered and eyes wide with terror, then the toy snake on her bed. My father cursed under his breath before scooping on my sister into his arms. My mother looked like she was going to cry. Her eyes darted down even before the noises began. Scratching. Something was scratching the wooden floor underneath our feet. Light at first soft, almost as if it was asking to be let in politely. Then louder. Louder and louder until it was violently clawing away the wood like tissue paper. The boards bent first, bowing upward as if the house itself were breathing. Then they split, splinters flying, and something began to crawl through. When my father saw what had emerged from below our feet, he set my sister down and stepped away. All he said was, "I'm sorry." He didn't sound angry. He didn't sound afraid. Just tired, like he'd been waiting for this, as if he had expected it. It was small. We had raccoons in our backyard that my sister and I would try to catch. At that moment, that's the only size comparison that I could think of. It crawled on its hands and knees, bloated and red, as if its skin was being pulled taut over too much of its own body. A putrid, fleshy cord dangled over its shoulders, coiling around its neck before disappearing into its own swollen belly. How could something so sickly, so small, be so strong? Its eyes locked onto my sister, and I jumped between the two. My mother cried out, "No!" Before either of my parents could move, the rotten child seized my ankle and hurled me across the room as if I were a toy soldier. I hit the wall, and my mom came to pick me up, both shielding and restraining me. But even if I had broken free, it wouldn't have mattered. In seconds, it had her. My sister's nails scraped across the floorboards, her muffled cry cut short as the thing dragged her into the hole below. I heard her scream again, but this time, it wasn't her hands that silenced it. The sound of flesh being torn from sinew, ligaments snapping, bones breaking. Then her voice called again. "Mom, Dad." It pulled itself back up from the darkness. The sight of it now forced me to vomit on the floor. It was bigger but wrong. Its arms and legs were uneven, its hands a clutter of mismatched fingers, as though it had been playing with bones the way a child plays with toys, jamming them into place, trying to look like my sister. Patches of her brown hair sprouted from swollen, red skin, clumps of it slick with blood. Her white teeth were crammed into its gray gums, sharp and uneven, like butcher knives buried in raw meat. But worst of all were the eyes. They were her eyes. I could still see the fear they held only moments ago, the betrayal and terror she had experienced. My father scooped my sister up in his arms and carried her out of the room. I could hear her monstrous, joyful cries as she tried to use her new, stolen voice. The rest of my childhood was spent pretending the monster had always been my sister, pretending that her laugh was hers, that her smile was hers. I was punished more harshly for mistreating her than I ever was for breaking the rule of silence. I moved out when I turned 16 and continued my game of pretend. I pretended my childhood never happened, that I was a normal man with a normal past and a normal family. Only one thing brings me comfort now. No matter how much my parents beg and plead and yell and berate, I will never have children. This ends with me, and it ends with her. Story 3. I bought a strange book that I can't stop reading. I'm afraid of how it ends. Since I was young, I have loved books. From being read the stories within by my parents to learning to read and being able to discover the adventures within, my appreciation for the written word has always been part of my life. When I was in high school, I began collecting books. At first, it was purely by accident, just a series of novels collected from my favorite authors. When I graduated and moved out, I realized that I had amassed nearly 100 books, a mass that was difficult to find a place for when I moved into a studio apartment. Despite my lack of space, I still would find myself buying books from my local bookstore every month. When I moved out of my tiny apartment into a 2-bedroom apartment, my best friend Lexi mentioned that it was a good thing I had picked a place with a room where I could store my collection of books, which had tripled in size in the 4 years since I moved out on my own. It was after I set the last box of books in what was soon to be my home office that she mentioned that I could probably make some money off of the books that I had acquired. With all of these books in here, I am sure there are a handful that are actually worth more than what you paid for, Lexi said, looking at an old first edition of The Great Gatsby that I had stacked on a precarious pile of J.R.R. Tolkien and C.S. Lewis novels. I wouldn't even know where to begin. Plus, I like having these tomes of history to surround me. I replied as I glanced at the confusing IKEA instructions for the first of many bookshelves that I would be building throughout the evening. Just look online. I'm sure you'll be able to find a place that buys old books. You might even make enough money to add more to your collection, she replied before grabbing us a couple beers for the long night ahead of us. With that simple suggestion, I entered into a rabbit hole of buying and reselling books, always certain to add to my collection more than what I sold off. I began searching estate sales and Goodwill for old books that I could add to my collection and on the rare occasion sell off for more books spending money. It was during one of my visits to an estate sale in a neighboring city that I found a peculiar book among a shelf of first editions and misprinted first runs. Bound in blue leather with an intricate gold trim was a book called 999 New Beginnings by C. Field. Before I was able to open the book to begin to identify how old the book was, the liquidator of the estate said that the collection of books could be mine for a bargain. $9,000 later, a price I was certain to make up for with the selling of a first edition of Blood Meridian. I gathered my new friends and returned home to my own personal fire hazard of a collection. After I listed a few of my recent purchases online, I picked up the 999 New Beginnings and turned to the copyright page. However, I could not find the page in the first few pages of the tome. Instead, after a few blank pages, I saw the table of contents listing off the sections within. While it did not list 999 individual stories, it did list off 9 different sections within a book. This did not make deciphering the contents any easier, as it simply listed off what I could only assume were an antiquated understanding of elements. Fire, written in red; ice, written in a light blue; wind, written in a light green; earth, written in a tannish brown; thunder, written in a vibrant yellow; water, written in a deep blue; shadow, written in a dark gray; holy, written in a silvery gray; void, written in a royal purple. My curiosity was instantly piqued, as each section did not have any corresponding page numbers. With no further clues, I began reading the first story. The first story, with fire and earth above, told of a poor boy that lived within a desert kingdom. He struggled to find work and had to rely on his cunning to steal food to feed himself and his elderly mother. When he was caught by the royal guard, he avoided death by convincing the guards that he was actually the prince of the neighboring kingdom. When the Sultan heard of the guards' disgraceful behavior, he begged the prince to marry his daughter to avoid the potential war that could arise for false imprisonment of the prince. The boy agreed and married the daughter, and had his elderly mother join them as his personal confidant. The story was simple, but while reading it, I felt the oddest sensation. I could feel the desert heat and smell the fresh baked bread, as though I was reading the book in that fictional place rather than in my air-conditioned apartment. I could feel my mouth drying out from the heat of a burning sun above, and had to pause to get a glass of water before I could keep reading the book. When the boy celebrated his wedding and drank wine and ate fruit, I could almost taste the flavors of what the book was describing. To me, the allure of books is their ability to make the reader feel like they are present in the story they are reading. It is why I've been so devoted in my love for books, but the book I had stumbled upon did by far the best in making me feel like I was actually there. I turned to the next story, Water and Wind, depicting a story of a fisherman catching a fish that was told to be impossible to catch. The entire time I read, I could smell the salty air and could almost feel the wind blowing mists of water onto my hair. When his boat capsized, it was as if I too was struggling to catch my breath as the man untangled himself from his net and swam his way up for air. When he finally took in a lungful of air and began to cough up water, I too had the sensation of coughing water out of my lungs. When the man made his way back to shore and entered the lighthouse and collapsed by his fireplace, I too could feel the warmth of the fire spread across my own shivering form. Despite the second story having a much more physical reaction out of me, I was unable to set the book down. I was drawn to the complete immersion I had while reading such simple yet captivating stories. I carried the book with me to the kitchen to grab a cup of coffee before reading the next story with the words ice, wind, and shadow written above. The third story was set on the Bering Land Bridge and followed a nomadic tribe as they hunted a mammoth. The chill of the cold climate ached at my bones, and I had to grab a blanket and turn off my air conditioning. A deep hunger began to ache in my stomach as the text described the weeks without any meat, and the meager provisions quickly diminished. When the tribe was forced to consume the flesh of those who had dropped due to starvation, I could feel the repulsive lurch in my stomach, as though I too had partaken in the morbid consumption of human flesh. With the success of taking down the great beast near the end of the passage, I joyfully celebrated with the characters as they danced around a fire and praised their god for the successful hunt. However, when the tribe reached a strange new world, one of the characters fell and broke her leg and was left behind as the rest of the tribe ventured onward. With the close of the story, I began to feel a deep ache in my leg. While clearly my leg did not have a piece of bone jutting out, there was a ghostly pain as though I had once broken my leg years ago. I set the book down and walked towards the bathroom. The sudden heat of the summer day permeated, and my decision to turn off my air conditioning seemed to have been a poor decision. I turned the unit back on, mildly amused that I had been so engrossed in the story that I had also joined in the freezing temperatures. It was as I staggered towards the bathroom that I realized my steps were not like my usual stride. I could still feel the phantom pain in my leg despite never having received an injury like that before. I decided that sleep was all that I needed. I had obviously engrossed myself into the book and just needed some rest. A glance at the clock revealing that it was already well into the early morning confirmed my decision, and I laid down for the night. Sleep welcomed me with dreams of desert kingdoms, fishing boats by lighthouses, and cold nights of desperation in search of food that wasn't human. Upon waking, I checked my laptop to see that a couple of my listings were already purchased and hastily prepped the books to be shipped. With a quick run to the post office and a stop at a local bookstore to buy a couple Grisham and Patterson novels, I returned home to continue reading the strange book I had acquired. The fourth story, Thunder and Holy Marked at the top of the page, told of the youngest son of a noble family joining the clergy. When the middle brother was killed during the 30 Years' War, and the oldest brother was excommunicated for his blasphemous beliefs against the church, the youngest brother was sought after to take charge of the family holdings. As he prayed for guidance for what he should do, a bolt of lightning struck the fir tree he would often sit under when he would think back about his childhood. As the tree burned down, I could smell the scent of burnt wood and light rain fill the air. The man decided that it was a sign to forsake his past and stay true to his faith. He refused the call and remained a clergyman, gaining much notoriety for his devotion. He died an old man, respected by the community for his devotion to faith, his family name forgotten along with any status that they once held. I immediately jumped in the next story, labeled as Shadow and Void. The story followed a young man who was recruited by his twin sister and her friends as their designated driver and drink observer. There had been a string of girls that had gone out and had disappeared without a trace. The young man vigilantly watched out over his sister and her friends, placing his hand over drinks and tossing them out when unsavory characters lingered for too long near them. Strangely, the book had what looked like a couple of missing pages. Inspecting the book closer, I noticed the slight fray of the remnants of the pages. An overwhelming disappointment filled me as key details of the story would be missing, but I relented and continued reading. A strange sensation of dread filled me as I continued reading. With a quick step, the young man caught up with his sister. He palmed the pill he was given by the overly friendly receptionist before tossing a breath mint into his mouth to dissuade her from any further inquiry. He entered the elevator with his sister before reassuring her that everything would be fine and that they would find her friends. As the elevator doors closed, they began to descend, his sister reaching for her head with slow and unsteady movements. He reached out for his sister, trying to catch her before she fell, when the sound of rushing air filled the small chamber and gas obfuscated his view. He began coughing, struggling to catch his breath, as I too could feel my lungs begin to fill with a foreign gas. He dropped to the ground as his vision blurred before falling into darkness. I had entered into a trance-like state, unable to pull myself from the pages of the book. My hands, no longer my own, turned the page. Every nerve in my body screamed in protest as a flood of pain howled to my core. The man was suspended, looking out at his sister as her body was cut open and vivisected. Pieces of her spread out into silver trays next to the medical table she laid upon. Glancing over towards a mirror erected at the foot of his own table, the man saw but could not comprehend the sight that mocked him. He was nothing but a collection of his nervous system connected to his eyes and brain. His physical form is not even a shell of its former self. Instead, it was a loose series of cords attached to a fatty chunk of gray. If he had a mouth, it would be screaming in terror. One of the men in sterile white casually looked over at his form, expressionless due to the face mask and strange glasses. With a few steps, the fiend in a doctor's disguise approached a machine and made a few keystrokes before the young man returned to darkness. When the world returned, he was screaming. He began to ask his sister and what happened to him, but was met with only confusion. He didn't have a sister, He was an only child, and the people standing over him were his caretakers. When he sheepishly looked towards the mirror at the foot of his bed, the terror paralyzed him. Looking back at him was a face he did not recognize. He was in a body that was not his own. He closed his eyes and began to pray that he would wake up from the hellish nightmare he had to be in. I finally regained control of my body as the story concluded. My hand shook, and I raced to the bathroom to look at myself. With a sigh of relief, the reflection I saw was my own. I returned to the book and closed it. After a few breaths, I opened it to be greeted with the words "holy" and "shadow" at the top of the page. A priestess stood before her followers and warned of invaders from the south coming to take their lands and spread their heresy. The tribes rebuked her, as all who had challenged their might before had fallen. Despite her warnings of the threat being like any seen before, none heeded her call. 3 weeks later, men draped in tunics made of metal raided their villages with shields decorated with stars and crosses. They razed the buildings and desecrated the places of worship. As the priestess ran through the settlement, fire engulfing the place she had lived for 16 winters, she was unable to outrun the powerful beasts dressed in the garb of their conquering commanders. A net, reminiscent of the ones that her father had used when he would gather heaps of fish, was cast over her. Entangled in the ropes, she felt just as the creatures of the sea, struggling for freedom. As she was bound and dragged from her home, she watched as the burning village grew smaller and smaller, until only the faint glow of destruction was all that could be seen in the horizon. Sat beside several other women and a few badly bruised men. The foreign invaders tossed small chunks of dense hardtack for the lot of them, and a small mouthful of bitter wine. They yelled in a tongue that the priestess could not understand, but a man amongst the soldiers that was one of her kinsmen, but dressed more like the soldiers, translated for them. He told the captives to forsake their gods and accept the blasphemy of the invaders, that the key to survival was to accept the new way of life. While the others did as they were told and mimed the strange words as they were told, the priestess refused and spat the bitter wine and stale food out at the towering figures standing before her. Refusing to renounce her faith for the lies of invaders, the priestess was forced to her feet. The determined look in her eyes mirrored her resolve. Her resolve was broken as her eyes were gouged out with a burning hot blade. My eyes seared with pain, and I dropped the book. I rushed to the bathroom, bumping into everything as I cried out in pain. The cold water I splashed onto my face soothed the fiery pain until I regained my sight a few minutes later. I dropped back and sat on the floor, resting my head against the wall as I contemplated the bizarre physical responses that I had experienced while reading this strange book. Despite every warning signal in my brain to leave the book alone, I returned to finish the story. The former priestess did as her attackers commanded. She ate their food, drank their bitter wine, and mimicked their alien tongue. Her world was now dark. The sight she had been blessed with to see the warnings of the future were now cut off, as she was no longer able to see anything ever again. Guided to an unknown and unlikely future, whenever she was commanded to do something, she did. The encouraging words of her kinsmen did little to mend her soul. She was held in high regard, but because of her warning being belittled, none of them would be able to practice what would become the old ways ever again. The story ended with an unforeseen future for the former priestess. As my hand prickled with pins and needles throughout, I turned the page and read the top of the next page. It was titled with the royal purple of the word void. Hesitantly, I began to read the next story. There was a young woman who was afraid she would disappear. I closed the book immediately and tossed it across the room. I did not want to know what the remainder of the story told. I still fear what the story could unveil for me if I was to continue. Yet, every day, I see the peculiar book I had acquired and can feel it call me to open the pages and dive more into the tales it contains. Every story I have read, I have felt the experiences it has contained inside. What would happen if I read more of a story about someone who feared disappearing and ended up disappearing in the story? It is a fate I do not want to tempt. The book still calls for a reader. How much longer can I resist? Story 4. A man was trapped inside my basement wall. He said someone told him I wouldn't be home. It had only been 2 weeks since I moved into my new house. I never thought I'd have enough money for a cute little home with a garden like this. But luck was finally on my side, and lately, I've been earning well. The house wasn't big, 2 small rooms, a tiny kitchen, and an even smaller bathroom, which meant the washing machine had to go in the basement, where I set up a little laundry area. It wasn't much, but it was mine. The neighborhood was quiet too, with friendly neighbors. Most people around here had families, but even in that short time, I'd gotten along with everyone. I thought nothing could ruin this idyllic little life I had carved out for myself. That is, until the day I went down to the laundry room with a basket of dirty clothes. As I made my way down the stairs, something felt off. There was something hanging from the narrow wall between the shelves, something I didn't register at first. When I turned on the light and stepped closer, I finally realized what it was. A hand. A human hand was sticking out of the wall. Only up to just before the wrist, it dangled lifelessly. A man's hand. It looked as if someone had been sealed inside the wall. Cold sweat broke out all over me. What the hell was this? There was nothing there yesterday. Was this some kind of sick joke? Should I call the police? What was I supposed to do? I panicked silently until the hand suddenly moved, as if it sensed I was pacing back and forth. It waved at me, flailing like someone drowning, begging to be pulled out. Without thinking, I grabbed it and started pulling. It didn't budge, like it really was part of the wall. The hand started twitching violently, signaling me to stop yanking. "Are you okay?" I asked, not even knowing if I was talking to the wall or the hand. The hand just kept waving, maybe trying to say no. What was I supposed to do? How could I help someone who was somehow trapped inside my wall? Then I had an idea. I ran back upstairs and grabbed a pen and a notepad. I pressed the pen into the hand, then held the paper out in front of it. "Are you okay? How can I help you?" I asked again, louder this time, just in case the person inside could hear me. The hand started writing. Almost immediately. "Help," it wrote. I was pacing up and down in the basement. What the hell was I supposed to do? I called the fire department, hoping maybe they could help, but they hung up as soon as I told them there was a man's hand sticking out of my wall. I was an idiot. Maybe I should have made something up just to get them to come. Whatever. I'd handle this myself, just like I handled getting this house in the first place. I went back upstairs. I knew there had to be a hammer and chisel somewhere. The house wasn't fully furnished yet, and the kitchen still needed some renovation, so it was hard to find anything. But eventually I found my tools. I rushed back down to the basement with them, and that's when I got the next surprise. The hand was sticking out more than before. I could now see all the way up to the man's bicep, and a little farther down the wall, just barely poking out, were the tips of another hand's fingers. 2 hands now, both coming out of the wall. I was shocked for a moment, but then quickly grabbed the tools and started chiseling around the first arm. The hands twisted in agony. They writhed like a worm cut in half. It was a horrifying sight. I immediately stopped and handed the paper to the hand again. "Are you okay? Did it hurt when I started breaking the wall? I just thought it might help you get out faster." The hand began writing again, slowly, shakily, the letters barely legible. "Yes, please don't. Let's just wait." I didn't know if I could trust him, but I agreed. Who was this man? And how did he end up inside my wall? Some kind of experiment? What the hell was going on? I brought down a chair for myself. Sat there, waiting, staring at the wall, or more precisely at the man inside it. That's when I noticed something near the bottom of the wall. A few toes were sticking out. My wall looked like someone was trying to walk out of it, just very, very slowly. What the hell was happening here? I gave up on the idea of calling for help. No one would believe me anyway. I'd deal with this on my own, whatever it was. "What's your name? Who are you?" I asked, getting up from the chair. The hand started writing on the paper again. "My name's Jack. I don't know how I ended up here. I was just walking home from work." I eyed the hand suspiciously again. This was all too weird. How did Jack get here? And how is he even alive with most of his body trapped inside a wall? But there wasn't much I could do for him. Anything I tried just caused him unbearable pain, and I couldn't help him get out any faster. I was starving by then, and I'd spent nearly the whole morning down there, so I ran out to grab food from the nearby diner. I rushed faster than I ever had in my life. I didn't want to miss what might happen next with Jack in the wall. All I could think was, please, let everything be the same when I get back. But when I returned, I got another horrifying surprise. His right arm was out all the way to the shoulder. The left arm hung only to the middle of the forearm. His left leg was sticking out up to the knee, like he'd taken a step forward, but it was crooked and jerky, like it had glitched halfway out of the wall. Only the foot of his right leg had emerged. My wall looked utterly grotesque, like something from a disturbing museum exhibit. I ate my lunch down in the basement. I didn't want to miss a single moment. But whenever I was there, Jack barely moved. His hands twitched from time to time, his legs shifted occasionally, but he didn't come any further out of the wall. "Jack, are you even human?" I asked after a long silence. Jack's hands began writing again. At least by now, he could hold the notepad himself. "Of course I'm human. I don't know what the hell happened. I just want to go home, god damn it." I felt a bit sorry for the guy. How the hell could he end up in a situation like this? Did someone do this to him? Or was it something else? Watching the wall was getting pretty dull. Time crawled by slowly. That's when my doorbell rang. Someone was at my door. I hurried upstairs, hoping, somehow, that it might be connected to Jack. Maybe someone had come with an explanation. But it was just my neighbor. He invited me to a backyard party for the weekend. He and his wife were hosting a little cookout with a kiddie pool, and they were inviting the other neighbors. As the new guy on the block, I was welcome too. The thought crossed my mind to mention Jack in the basement. But as soon as I was about to say something, I realized it was better to keep my mouth shut. Not exactly the best first impression to say, "Oh, by the way, I've got a half-naked man coming out of my basement wall." I'd sound like a lunatic, or a killer, or both. So I just accepted the invitation and said I'd bring something as a gift. As soon as the neighbor left, I rushed back downstairs. And thank God I hadn't said a word about Jack. His right arm was still only visible up to the shoulder, but the left was now out to the top of the elbow. His left leg was fully free, and the right had emerged up to mid-thigh. His hips were beginning to show through the wall, and yes, so was his penis. I was completely shocked. A naked man was crawling out of my basement wall. What the actual fuck was going on? No matter how hard I tried to stay in the basement all afternoon, there were things that eventually forced me to go upstairs. One of them was a bathroom break, but I tried to take care of everything all at once. After using the toilet, I quickly made myself some dinner, and of course in my rush I managed to cut my finger. So I had to deal with that too. But at least, it gave me an idea. I brought water and dinner down with me. And embarrassing as it is, I also brought a bucket to, do my business in. I was worried Jack might come through while I wasn't there. I also brought down a pair of pants. They were the same old ones I used when painting the house. Now I figured Jack could wear them, since his lower half was already fully exposed, and staring at a naked man wasn't exactly comfortable. Once I had all that sorted, I followed through on my idea. I had brought the kitchen knife with me, the one I'd used to slice tomatoes for dinner. I wanted to check if Jack was really human. I grabbed his right hand and gently cut into it with the knife that I didn't go deep. If he was just a regular guy, I didn't want to seriously hurt him. But there was no blood. Not a drop came out of his skin. "Jack, what the hell are you?" I backed away from the body sticking out of my wall. Jack just flailed his arms. He scrawled something on the paper. "I'm human. I haven't hurt anyone. I don't deserve this." I didn't know who or what to believe. But one thing was clear. The knife was staying with me. And I wasn't taking my eyes off him. Unfortunately, the bucket turned out to be a bad idea. By evening, I had to use it twice. Because of that, the basement started to stink pretty badly. It wasn't exactly pleasant to sit around in that kind of smell. I ran upstairs, emptied the bucket, and used the toilet again. I did it as fast as I could. But even so, when I came back down, I was shocked. Jack was almost completely out of the wall. Only his shoulders and everything above them, his neck and entire head, were still stuck inside. The old paint-stained pants I had put on him had slipped off because Jack was shorter and slimmer than me. So once again, he stood there completely naked, like some twisted mannequin. The sight always horrified me whenever I came downstairs. I quickly pulled the pants back up on him, at least to cover his lower half. And once again, the doubts began to gnaw at me. Jack looked like a completely normal man. True, I still hadn't seen his face, but his body looked like that of an average man in his 30s. Still, the suspicion lingered. Why didn't he bleed? How did he get into my wall? I decided I wouldn't go back upstairs for a while. I was going to stay there, really wait until Jack came out of the wall. The evening dragged on. It got harder and harder to stay awake. I didn't even want to move from my chair. I just stared at the headless body hanging from my wall until sleep finally overtook me. I woke up with a start, like someone who'd overslept and missed their alarm. But what really shocked me, Jack was gone. There was nobody hanging from the wall. And worse, the basement door was wide open. I climbed up from the basement cautiously. I held the knife in front of me, gripping it tightly. Whatever this was, if Jack tried to attack me, I would defend myself. But nothing like that happened. The hallway was empty. The bathroom seemed empty too. It was in the kitchen where the surprise awaited me. A bald man was standing by the window in my half-finished kitchen. He was looking out, his back turned to me. He was wearing paint-stained pants. It was Jack. "I see you made it out, Jack," I said to him, still gripping the knife tightly, ready to strike. Jack didn't answer. He just kept staring out the window, looking into my backyard with his back to me. "If you need help, we can call someone. Or, I don't know," I continued, still trying to sound diplomatic. "They told me no one would be here," Jack said suddenly. His voice was calm, kind, and polite. "What do you mean?" I asked, confused. "I'm sorry," Jack said emotionlessly. "No one can know where I came from." Then, without warning, Jack turned around and grabbed a knife from the kitchen counter. I just stood there, stunned, because Jack had no face. His head was just a smooth, pale surface, no features, no mouth, no eyes. Like a freshly painted wall. I barely managed to dodge when I snapped out of it. Jack charged at me again. But this time, I didn't just stand there. I swung my knife and slashed his arm. It cut in, but it was like he didn't even feel it. There was no blood. Not a single drop. Still, Jack didn't hold back either. As my knife was lodged in his arm, he grabbed his own knife and stabbed me in the side. I let out a scream of pain. But this thing, it didn't stop. He ripped the knife out of my side and came at me again. I tried to defend myself, with mixed success. He slashed my face deep from my eye to just above my ear. When I lifted my arm to protect myself, he stabbed into that instead. I screamed again and pushed him away with all my strength. Jack pulled the knife out of my arm and then slashed me across the stomach lengthwise. At that point, I was bleeding from almost everywhere. I realized I had to run, somehow. Jack wasn't human. Shoving him, punching him, stabbing him, it didn't do anything. I tried to get out of the house, but the stabbing made it hard to move. I collapsed between the kitchen counter and the sink. Jack stood over me. That strange, faceless head stared right at me. His body was covered in blood, my blood. I thought it was over. This thing was going to kill me. Then I heard someone knocking at the door. "Neighbor? Are you okay? What's all that yelling? Do you need help?" It was a man's voice. The neighbor who'd invited me to the garden party. I silently thanked whatever powers existed that he heard me screaming. But Jack didn't wait. He plunged the knife into me again. I tried to fight back, but the strength behind that blow was inhuman. He stabbed me in the gut. I screamed again, and that's when the neighbor broke down the door. Jack, like a thief caught in the act, ran. Just before I passed out, I saw him crash through the glass door to the backyard and sprint away into the night. Then everything went black. The doctor said I was incredibly lucky. If my neighbor had found me just a little later, or hadn't called the ambulance right away, I would have bled to death right there. I didn't tell the police anything. I said the attacker was wearing a mask, that I couldn't see who it was. It was better this way. They never would have believed me, that a faceless man who climbed out of my basement wall had stabbed me. I thought a lot about what Jack said while I was recovering. I had plenty of time. It took me over half a year to recover from my injuries. Who told Jack that no one would be in that house? And where did he even come from? I had a lot of questions. But one thing I was sure of, if Jack ever came back, or if someone else ever came into our world through my wall, I wouldn't be so useless next time. I wouldn't be caught off guard again. Story 5. I've had a doppelganger my whole life. A bit of personal backstory. I'm Riley. I'm a Caucasian woman in my early 30s, and I live alone in a small town in northeastern New Hampshire, near the White Mountains. It's a beautiful area to live in, especially during the late summer. You get the benefits of fall temperature and full sun at the same time, all before it becomes too cold to go out without a hoodie. I grew up in Massachusetts and moved up north in my 20s for a bit of solitude. My mother was getting a bit intense for me, and my dad was always working, so I packed up my things and traveled upwards. But there's another reason I moved up here. I've had this problem my whole life. There's another me. I don't mean like a twin, or a delusion, or a spirit or monster taking my shape. Just straight up another me. The first time I saw her, or it, or whatever, I couldn't have been older than 7. I remember playing on the playground after school hours. I kicked a ball over to this line of spiky bushes. Now, being a kid, I was scared of these bushes because they hurt a lot despite not being outright dangerous. Hey, nobody likes pain, right? So I went to grab my kickball, but something was off. I saw a second identical one right next to mine. Keep in mind it was nearly getting dark, and it was just my mother and I out here, and we're getting packed up to leave. I didn't see any other kids or parents or bright red kickballs. Whatever. I shrugged it off, thinking maybe some kid left theirs here. After I worked through the irrational fear I had of the thorn bush, I bent down to grab my own ball, looked up, and saw myself looking right back at me. This other Riley looked just as surprised to see me as I was her. We both made eye contact and jumped back at the same time, each one of us silent and curious, but too scared to speak. The terror I felt was unreal. There's no way this was just another neighborhood kid. We had the same eyes, same hair, same blue overalls, same white polka dot shirt, same light-up Skechers. We even shared the same mole under our left eye. My mom called my name, reminding me again that it was dark and that we had to go. Coming. We both shouted it at the same time, then looked at each other in confusion again. You know that deep panicked feeling where the only thing you can do in order to not lash out or scream is to hyperventilate and pace in place. I had my first taste of that at that moment. Before I could think of it, I shoved the doppelganger into the thorn bushes and sprinted to my mom in terror, sobbing in fear. "Oh, honey, we can come back over the weekend," she assured me. I couldn't get the words out to tell her why I was really crying. I was 7, for God's sake. What was I supposed to say? I just clung to her for dear life as she buckled me up and drove off. As we were leaving, I looked out the window. I saw myself getting out of the bushes with bloody knees and angry tears in my eyes, watching as the real me drove off with our mother. I'll admit, most of those details were fuzzy, but I'll never forget standing up and seeing my own face. I still can't look at myself in the mirror without seeing that other me out by the thorn bush in the darkening playground, staring daggers at me. Those 2 moments are clear as day in my memory, even if nothing else is. The next time I saw her was my 10th birthday. I had a massive Disney theme party, as all little girls in the late 90s did. I had to be Cinderella, of course. I remember stepping away to use the bathroom while my mom brought out the cake, promising to wait for me to cut it. From where I was in the bathroom, I could hear people right outside as the porch spanned the entire side of the house beyond those walls. It was faint, but I was able to hear birthday singing. Confused, I finished my business and rushed out as quickly as possible. I froze at the sliding glass door. There, standing in my cake with my friends and my family, in my fucking Cinderella costume, was the fucking doppelganger. As if sensing me, we locked eyes. She stopped laughing into a bite of cake and dropped it into the dirt. My mom tenderly wiped her face clean and got her another slice, but she was barely aware of it. I forget exactly what happened next. All I remember was being so filled with rage, seeing this fake version of me being pampered by my own mother. But she didn't seem malicious. She seemed scared. She had the same look on her face that I must have when I saw her the first time. And I had the same angry, tear-faced glare she had back then. It was like we swapped places. I remember storming out and tackling the other me to the ground, screaming for her to get away from my mom. The entire party panicked. It took at least 3 adults, 2 friends' parents and my mom, I think, to pull me off. But when I calmed down enough to sit still and stop attacking, I just saw my best friend Katie lying there beaten to a pulp. I looked around for any sign of my other self. I didn't see any, not even a single glass slipper footprint. By now, you might be suspecting some kind of psychotic break. My mom thought so too. Frankly, everyone I ever relayed the birthday story to did. I eventually ended up in therapy. My mom says that what really happened was that Katie was getting a slice of cake early since she had to go home, and she would say goodbye to me after I went pee, but I suddenly attacked her. My mom thinks I saw her taking the first slice and threw a tantrum. But know what I saw that day? Needless to say, Katie and I weren't friends after that. I lost a lot of friends, actually. The jealous stepsister became a cruel nickname for me at school, a vicious parody of the party I try to have for myself. Eventually, I stopped trying to convince anyone about the doppelganger story. The psychiatrist and my family therapist put me on antipsychotics. They made me drowsy and hungry, but I started to think that I really had dreamed up this whole thing. Maybe this doppelganger was a recurring nightmare, and I just had a psychotic break from the trauma of it when I beat Katie into the ground. But of course, it's never that simple. The next time I saw her, I was 15. I had my first boyfriend, Anthony. Anthony was 16, short, a little chubby, and really good at math. Not that any of that matters, but it gives you an idea of his overall vibe. He was the nerdy fat kid to most people, but I liked him, and we studied a lot together. He got me into anime, and I got him into Harry Potter. It was typical teen stuff. One day at school, I approached him and said hi in that awkward, flirty way teens do. He looked pissed off. I asked him what was wrong. He scoffed and said, "I thought you were done playing around with the fat nerd." I asked him what the hell he was talking about. He pulled out his phone, an old 90s flip phone, of course, and began to read aloud. "Anthony, I can't do this anymore. I'm done playing around with the fat nerd. You're a creepy loser who sits around and watches cartoons. Call me when you lose weight and get some real hobbies." I accused him of making that all up, of course, but he shoved the phone in my face to see for myself. Sure enough, it was my contact and number on the tiny screen. He snapped it shut in my face, called me a shallow bitch, and walked away. I checked my own phone in confusion, and sure enough, I had sent those exact words to him the night before. But I didn't remember it all. Right then, I got a text from, you guessed it, my own phone number. "That's for ruining my birthday, you slut." This had to be a joke, right? But no, spoofing numbers wasn't as easy back then as it is now. Besides, if it was spoofed, my own phone wouldn't have had the records, right? I looked around in anger, fully expecting to see the other me by now. Sure as shit, I did. She rounded the corner quickly at a speed walk. I chased her down into an empty hallway and into the girls' bathroom. Once inside, however, she was gone. Both stalls were empty, too. I pulled my antipsychotics from my clutch purse and counted them out right there on the nasty sink, just to make sure I didn't miss any. I had to be going crazy, right? Some sort of schizophrenia or personality disorder. But no, I was taking all my pills exactly as scheduled. Eventually, I started talking to my therapist about the doppelganger again. Of course, me being a hormonal teenage girl in the 90s, he thought it was my period throwing off my meds. So he gave me a new pill that did just about the same amount of nothing. My entire life has been more and more of the same. Every once in a while, this other me would appear and cause chaos in my livelihood. Sometimes I'd be the one being spotted while she was doing something normal, like at the fateful birthday party. Most of the time, it was me dealing with the fallout of something she did. And I feel like it all ties back to that day that I'm the one that went home with my mom instead of her. However, even though her actions got meaner, she never stopped being just as scared of me as I was as her. And the few times I did get her back, I wasn't exactly nice either. I'm not sure that she knows she's the fake one, or if she thinks she's real and I'm the clone, or what. I've never seen her do something demonic or supernatural. She's always just been me, down to the fear and anger. It's like we're rivals fighting over the same life. Speculations aside, let's cut to the most recent time I saw her, the start of this week. Now, I've been living here for about 15 years now. The other me's constant antics would get me into lots of trouble, and my mom wouldn't hear a word about me not being the one doing any of it. I eventually got myself off of medication and moved my ass away from my mom just to try and start fresh somewhere. I've become a bit of a recluse, paranoid that if I were to start making friends, she'd sabotage it, or I'd see her in my place and repeat another Katie incident. I didn't want to end up in prison for assault or being blamed for slashing someone's tires or God knows what else. Last night, as I was making dinner, she came out from my bedroom. She gave me the frightened look again, which I matched. I decided I had enough. I had to see what the fuck was happening. I had to talk to her. Let me guess. I began, choking down my fear and replacing it with fury. "What are you doing in my kitchen?" She looked at me like a deer in headlights, obviously shaken. Can you talk?" "Of course I can fucking talk," I replied. "I just don't bother doing it anymore. You'll come along and fuck it up." "Me fuck things up?" Her voice got angry in return. "I'm not the one who appeared in our fucking childhood home and beat the shit out of Katie while I was having cake. Katie wasn't even there. I was going for you. You got sang my birthday song in front of my friends, broke up with my boyfriend. It was my birthday. Why can't you just fuck off already? I got enraged. I grabbed the boiling pot of stew from the stove and threw it in that fake bitch's face. She screamed and blistered. Again, no monster reveal, no teleporting magic. No, it was all a dream. She just blistered, like a human would. She grabbed the knife from the table and stabbed me in the arm. We rolled around on the floor, screaming bloody murder at each other. Neither of us agreed on who was the fake. We let our fists decide. The winner takes all. I blacked out. I'm typing this on my phone from the hospital. I'm showing this post to the psychiatrist tomorrow. According to the doctors, I had a break after a prolonged period of being off my medication. I poured hot food all over myself, permanently scarring my face and body, and slashed at myself with a knife. Neighbors reporting screaming. Not multiple voices. Just a single, crazy bitch with a kitchen knife. Police arrived, and I was on the ground in critical condition. I was out for 4 days from a concussion and blood loss. Luckily, I put my mom on my do not contact list ages ago. She'd never let me hear the end of it. I hear the nurse coming, so I'll end this here for now. Please, if anyone can tell me what the FUCK is going on, even if I'm just crazy, let me know. If any of you know any magic or hoodoo or ancient banishing rituals for this shit, please share. I'm losing my will to do this much longer. And I swear on my very soul, that nurse looks just fucking like me. Riley out. Let's hope I'm the right one. Story 6. The whole town goes outside during full moons, and what they're staring at isn't natural. My girlfriend Jordan and I moved to Roxborough Hollow 3 months ago. We thought we'd found paradise, a tiny town nestled in the Appalachian foothills, population 914, where you could rent a 2-bedroom house for what we'd been paying for a studio apartment back in Kansas City. More importantly, it was far enough from our families that they couldn't interfere with our plans to get married without the circus they all wanted. The real estate agent, a cheerful woman named Mrs. Wood, had shown us around town with obvious pride. Main Street stretched for exactly 4 blocks, lined with the kinds of shops you'd expect: Jacob's General Store, Mariah's Diner, a small post office, and an old-fashioned barbershop with a spinning pole. Everyone we met seemed genuinely friendly, the kind of place where neighbors actually knew each other's names. "You'll love it here," Mrs. Wood had said as we signed the lease. Roxborough Hollow is very traditional. People here value their routines. We settled in quickly. I found work at the county's road maintenance department, and Jordan got a part-time job at the library. The pace of life was exactly what we'd hoped for. Slow, peaceful, predictable. For the first month, everything was perfect. Then came our first full moon. I should mention that our house sits on a small hill at the edge of town, with a clear view of Main Street and most of the residential area. Jordan loves to sit on our back porch in the evenings, and I'd gotten into the habit of joining her with a beer after work. The night sky was flawlessly clear at least once a month. It was during one of these quiet moments that we first witnessed what the locals simply call the watching. It started around 9 p.m. Jordan noticed it first. She'd been mid-sentence, telling me about some new books that had arrived at the library, when she suddenly stopped talking. "Tony," she whispered, grabbing my arm. "Look." Down in the town, people were emerging from their houses, but they weren't walking normally. They moved with an odd, mechanical precision, their arms hanging straight at their sides, their heads tilted back at angles that made my neck hurt just looking at them. Men, women, children, entire families filing out of their homes and gathering in the streets, their faces turned skyward. Story 7. A masked man has given me a list of rules in my dreams. If I break them, he punishes me. When I first saw the masked man, it was 10:37 p.m. on Tuesday, April 18th, 2002. I remember because my parents had allowed me to stay up an extra hour to watch my favorite TV show, Bear Time with Mr. Teddy. A few minutes after falling asleep, it became clear that this was not the dreamland I was accustomed to. There were no toys, or friends, or hugs from Mom. Instead, there was him. He always appeared from darkness, gliding on a wave of black, formless and faceless as dream itself. The masked man neither smiled nor threatened, never shouted nor heralded his own presence. I never saw the back of the masked man, but what I did see of him revealed nothing about what sort of person he might be behind that mask. It was a long, thin facade, not unlike images I would later see of plague doctors in medieval Europe. But his was wider and lacked the queer, bird-like appearance of those erstwhile medicine men. That is not to say that the mask was not queer. It shone black, and when I stared deeply into its rippling surface, I saw what looked like whole worlds disappearing into its unnatural depths. All at once, without any perceptible movement on the part of him, a tube appeared at his hand. In the inexplicable way that dreams reveal themselves to us, I knew that the tube should be feared. My skin erupted in cold sweat, and I tried to scream, but just as the blackness of his mask stole whatever light surrounded the man's face, it quieted all sound. I had been enveloped in the inky blackness and felt its frigid touch across my small, 5-year-old body. But nothing could have prepared me for the hell that came next. With no warning, the masked man flung his tube towards me and watched as it attached itself to my mouth. I attempted to pry it away, but the thing merely became stuck to my hands as well. And so, helplessly, I watched with widening eyes as the tube slowly curled into my mouth, down my throat, and into my lungs. I could do nothing but plead with silent, watering eyes locked onto the masked man as he stood, silent and inscrutable, and as the tube filled my lungs with the same inky blackness until I felt that I would burst. All the while a loud, hoarse screeching noise erupted around the void, rising ever higher in volume and urgency. For minutes and minutes on end I gasped, or attempted to gasp, as the cold, glue-like shadows crushed me from within. At the same time, my entire body began to weaken more and more until the sensation was nearly as frightening as the all-consuming asphyxiation. After watching this brutal torture, for how long I could not have guessed, the masked man held up a scroll. It was empty, and I was confused by the gesture. As I watched, the masked man dragged a scorched claw across the top of his scroll to reveal, in glowing, black letters, a single phrase, a command. Do not watch Bear Time with Mr. Teddy. I woke, heaving and covered in cold sweat. Naturally, I screamed for my parents, who rushed into the room and held me. They were quick to remind me that dreams can't hurt you, that they loved me, that the masked man wasn't real. As a child, you believe the things you're told because you're a child, your parents are all-knowing gods, and because you know nothing. So I believed that the masked man didn't exist. But even at 5 years old, I couldn't help but think that whether he existed or not was almost beside the point. The pain that he had inflicted was very real, and I would do anything not to feel it again. I thought about the scroll that the masked man had held, with its simple imperative, do not watch Bear Time with Mr. Teddy. Bear Time was my favorite show, and I definitely didn't want to give it up because of some silly dream. But the memory of the black tar, the drowning, and the pain made me hesitate. All of the next day, I thought about the masked man. Even bringing him to mind made me start to shiver with aftershocks of the pain. My little 5-year-old body vibrated like it was hooked up to a live wire. Mrs. Grayson, my kindergarten teacher, asked me what was wrong, and I told her that I'd had a nightmare. She smiled at me, put a comforting hand on my shoulder, and said not to worry. She taught me a song that would make any monsters leave me alone. Badman, go away. Come again another day. Little Jamie wants to play. Come again another day. In my young mind, I'd just been given a shield against the masked man. So that night, I turned on Bear Time without a care in the world. Looking back on it, I don't remember much about the show itself. I just remember how comforting it felt to watch it, like being wrapped in a warm hug. It brings to mind that famous Maya Angelou quote, "People will forget what you said, people will forget what you did, but people will never forget how you made them feel." After the show was over, it was time for me to go to sleep. My parents surrounded me with my favorite toys, turned out the lights, and soon I was snoring peacefully under the covers. Almost immediately, the masked man returned. He glided into the frame of my mind's eye, trailing his cold, inky blackness. We locked eyes, and I pulled myself up to my full 4 feet of height and began singing Mrs. Grayson's song. Badman, go away. Come again another day. Little Jamie wants to play. Come again another day. But the masked man had no reaction whatsoever to my voice. Instead, he glided closer and closer until my words began to disappear into the shining blackness of his mask. He stood there with his head pointed vaguely in my direction, spreading dark tendrils across my body until suddenly his arm shot out towards me, and that same, all-consuming hoarse screech came from everywhere and nowhere. The tubes of black curled through my mouth and nose and down into my lungs. That unbearable pressure began to build, and the suffocation started to squeeze, and my eyes started to bulge, and through it all an irresistible panic rose from my chest until it was all I could feel. Along with the panic came that same overwhelming weakness which drained every drop of strength from my petrified muscles. Soon, I was incapable of motion without Herculean effort. Pointing at the masked man became unthinkable as running an Olympic marathon. But, with tremendous pain and determination, I was able to move the muscles in my eyes until my pupils pointed in his direction, silently pleading with him to end my suffering. Or, if not that, at least my life. Instead, he stared back with that cold, inscrutable visage and held up his scroll, tapping on the first line which still read, "Do not watch Bear Time with Mr. Teddy." Eventually, I woke from this hell and screamed for my parents once again. They held me, rocked me, and whispered soothing words into my ears. But I was beyond inconsolable. There could no longer be any doubt. The masked man was real. Even through cold sweat and tears, my traumatized 5-year-old mind was beginning to come to terms with my new reality. I lived at the pleasure of the masked man. From then on, I refused to watch Bear Time. My parents tried to put it on the next night to get me to sleep, but I screamed and hid my face under the blankets, shaking uncontrollably and shouting to the masked man that I wouldn't watch, that I hadn't watched it, that I was being a good boy. They turned it off and exchanged glances which looked almost as terrified as I felt. As a child, the idea that your parents could be as afraid as you does not enter your mind. They aren't people like you. They're the ones who are supposed to know. But nobody really understood the masked man. For a while, I managed to avoid him. I'd even begun to convince myself that he was just a nightmare. But then, one night, he came again, gliding on his wave of black. As the terror and the pain surrounded me, a new sensation spread across my mind: indignation. I'd followed the rule, hadn't I? It had been weeks since I'd watched Bear Time. Not even a glimpse of it on the screen. Of course, I was unable to plead my case to the masked man, and could only stand their suffering, silent agony. This time, however, when he held up the scroll, his dark claw dragged across the second line and revealed another command: do not take an even number of steps on any given day. Eyes opened. Bedroom dark. Screaming. Parents rushing in. Still, even after I had suffered through the pain several times, it was overwhelming. It isn't true what they say, that time heals all wounds. Some of them just fester and poison your blood. From then on, I counted each step that I took. 1 good, 2 bad, 3 good. Kids at school began to look at me funny. Then they stopped wanting to play with me. I hardly noticed, so consumed was I with my counting. It was life counting. A single misstep and the masked man would return. Not everyone avoided me. There was one boy named Alan who was also special. Our parents thought it would be good for us to spend some time together, so they shipped me off to his house one weekend for a sleepover. It hadn't occurred to them to wonder whether we had anything in common besides our mutual isolation. As it turned out, we didn't. Alan was sitting in a corner, stacking Legos when I came in. I asked Alan if he wanted to build something with me, but he just kept stacking and didn't even seem to realize that I was there. When I tapped him on the shoulder, he shoved me hard onto the ground. I yelled at him and shoved him back. His parents came in to separate us, and I was afraid that they'd be upset with me. But this was apparently not the first time that Alan had had an issue with shoving. They told him, very sternly, not to do it again, and left the room. Alan reluctantly agreed to let me add blocks to his tower, but only if I put them where he wanted them to go. As I busied myself finding the very particular pieces that he described to me, get the yellow one with 2 dots sideways and 3 dots up and down, a terrifying thought occurred to me. Did Alan's shove count as a step? I hadn't taken it myself, but I had moved. Before that, The count was 2,137. Was I at 2,138 now? Should I take another? Alan interrupted my thoughts by yelling at me for putting the yellow block on the wrong side of the tower. I moved it quietly and went back to trying to work it out. It wasn't as if I could ask the masked man for clarification. He only showed up in my dreams, and then only to torture me. That night, after Alan's parents had put us to bed, I lay wide awake, staring at the ceiling. Maybe if I didn't fall asleep, the masked man couldn't hurt me. The count would reset tomorrow, after all. But then wouldn't he just punish me when I did fall asleep? I figured that it was worth a try, and that at the very least I could spare myself the pain for this one night. So I kept myself awake all through the night, which to a 6-year-old, my birthday had just recently come and gone. Felt like years. In the morning, I started the count again, but couldn't help but be distracted by this legalistic minefield I had entered. All I could think about, every time my mind wandered, was the last time a masked man had come, how much it had hurt, and how desperate I was to avoid it happening again. So I stayed awake that night too, and the night after that, and the night after that. But there's only so long that you can keep your eyes open before your brain will make you sleep. Later, as an adult, I read extensively about the science of sleep to determine if there was any way to remove the need for it altogether. As it happened, there was an odd case of an American man who was born without any need for sleep. He sat in his rocking chair and read a newspaper every night and got up refreshed in the morning. Another man, a soldier from Hungary, claimed to have lost the need for sleep after a gunshot to the head. Yet another man, a farmer from Thailand, claimed to have not needed sleep ever since a childhood fever. None of these cases was ever explained or conclusively verified. I, however, was not like these people. Sleep was an absolute necessity, and it claimed me whether I liked it or not. This time, however, the masked man did not come. Apparently, the shove from Alan had not counted. Of course, I had no way to know this as I was drifting off, and the last sensation that went through my mind before darkness claimed me was one of absolute terror. I woke up shaking, but quickly realized that I'd managed to avoid the masked man. A feeling of all-consuming relief flooded my body, and I sobbed, not in fear, but out of the sheer happiness of avoiding torture. Then I began to think about how sad it was that this fact brought me so much joy. This was a thought that would inhabit me throughout my life, the quiet, brutal dissonance between my life and the norm. Why was it that I, a seemingly good kid with no sins I could think of, was condemned to this existence of endless calculation, just to avoid pain, when others ran and played outside in the sun without a care in the world? I glanced out the window at the rising sun and saw a boy and a girl not much older than me playing with a ball in the street. I thought about how, if that were me, I would be counting each step and covering my eyes to avoid any nearby television screens. I thought about how unfair it all was, and began crying all over again, but this time for real. I turned my face to the ceiling, up to the sky, up to God, and whispered a tiny, childlike prayer, asking for an end to the pain. But there was only silence in return. Years later, I would read the work of French philosopher Albert Camus and come across his discussion of the absurdity of a world that places conscious beings into a position where they are faced with the unreasonable silence of the world. It occurred to me then, and occurs to me now, that this rather understates the matter. The world may be silent, but that silence rarely feels unreasonable. It felt, to that small, terrified 6-year-old boy, like an accusation of a terrible crime. And after many years, I began to believe that this was the case. The more I was hurt, the more I began to feel like I deserved the hurt, and hated myself for it. What an awful person I must be. I thought to myself, why else would I be in pain all the time? But this was before I learned the most terrible secret of existence. Justice is only the most cruel of the lies we tell ourselves to sleep peacefully at night. The free prize we were promised at the bottom of the cereal box of life, only to find cheap cardboard and the saccharine sweet face of some corporate mascot. At least I'd avoided the pain for one more day. Or so I thought. The next night, when I went to sleep, I saw the masked man and immediately tried to wake myself up. This was another tactic I explored through the years, but to no avail. I once paid a surgeon from the former Soviet Union to watch me while I slept and wake me at the first sign of a nightmare. He told me when I woke that he had tried everything he could think of. Drugs, deep brain stimulation, you name it. But nothing could interrupt the horrific penance demanded by the masked man. That night, however, I was just confused. I had been certain to count my steps and avoid television screens, and knew that I had followed the rules. Nevertheless, the same inky blackness curled into my lungs and had me gasping against its frigid tendrils. The same unbearable weakness drained my body of the last of its strength. As it happened, I assumed that this was a delayed reaction to my misstep with Alan. The masked man must have come just a day too late. But instead, he dragged his claw across the third line on the scroll to reveal another command. Always wear green on Thursdays. And so, from then on, I always wore green on Thursdays. It was clear then that the masked man intended to continue adding rules to his list. Even if I followed each one to the letter, there was always another ready to reveal itself and draw his wrath. As the months wore on, the masked man added more and more rules, each time taking his pound of flesh in my dreams. The number of rules was becoming difficult to manage, so I kept a list of them in a piece of paper in my breast pocket, by my heart. Later, I would keep it in my phone so I could check it whenever I needed. Even Alan stopped hanging out with me after that. The other kids ignore me for the most part, but some thought it was funny to mess up my count or to steal one item or another of clothing that the masked man had ordered me to wear. Eventually, it became impossible for my parents to ignore my bizarre behavior, and they insisted that I talk to a shrink. At first, I thought that maybe he would be able to help. But after a month or two of breathing exercises and meditation, I realized that he was just as ill-prepared to deal with the masked man as my parents had been. I saw him once a week, mostly to appease them, but knew that he wouldn't stop the masked man from coming. Over the years, I withdrew more and more from the world. I made a friend here or there, but they would always quietly slip away when it became clear that I couldn't leave the house for more than a few minutes at a time. By then, I had become completely consumed by doing the masked man's bidding. I was always doing my counting. I was terrified to see a television screen or a red door handle. I was forbidden from constructing a sentence which contained 2 words with 5 syllables each, and so on, and so on. But even with that constant vigilance, I was not good enough to stop his appearances entirely. He still came some nights, and each time the pain was worse than the last. Once in a while, I found a girl willing to put up with these eccentricities, but they never stayed for long. I dropped out of college after attending classes became too great of a risk. My campus was in a wooded area, and I was forbidden from seeing more than 2 oak trees a day. Little by little, I stopped leaving the house altogether. I managed to find a remote job entering numbers into a table. I clicked here and there, moving the squiggles into the correct columns until they turned green. When I'd saved up enough money, I rented a cabin in the middle of nowhere, far from any possible reasons to trigger an appearance by the masked man. And this is where I've been for the last few years. My skin is bleached white from lack of exposure to the sun. My hands are so pale that if I hold them up to the window, they almost blend in with the clouds. Last night, I peered at myself in the mirror and saw a gaunt unperson staring back. Inside, I'm still that small, terrified child who first saw the masked man, but the man in the mirror looks far older than his 28 years. He is bent, wizened, and weak. His hair is prematurely thinning, and his hands shake with the very effort of life. He is tired of this existence. Even with this self-imposed imprisonment, the masked man still comes, still exacts his terrible price. And so he has decided that today is the last day. I watch as he reaches into the medicine cabinet to retrieve a revolver. He opens it, checks to make sure that the bullets are loaded, blows some dust off of the barrel, and closes it again. He places it against his forehead and smiles a little skeletal smile. Finally, he will be free of the masked man. He has waited his entire life to say those words. He's always known that this was a way out, but he hasn't had the courage to do it until today. He presses his finger to the trigger, intending to pull it, when all of a sudden he's gripped by an all-consuming terror. His eyes roll back into his head, and he falls to the floor. As his body shakes uncontrollably, his mind is in a very familiar void, all made of black. Formless and faceless, A masked man glides on a wave of darkness until he stands before the skeletal figure. The masked man raises him up and points to a scroll as the tendrils begin to wind their way into the figure's mouth. As the figure's eyes widen, and he begins to gag with the familiar black agony, the masked man drags his claw across the scroll to reveal one final command. The last one on the list. The last one he will ever need. Do not die. Story 8. My cat is afraid of me. It wasn't always this way. When I adopted Gerald as a kitten, he acclimated to my little one-bedroom duplex right away. Not a trace of timidity. He's about 1 year old now, a sleek orange tabby with white paws who gets into more trouble than I can manage. I've caught him climbing curtains, knocking over glasses of water, and sending embarrassing keyboard smash messages to my coworkers by napping on my open laptop. Normal, well-adjusted cat behavior. This week, he started to avoid me. I first noticed it at mealtimes. When I filled his dish on Monday morning, I was met with an empty kitchen. Gerald is usually a demanding little fellow, yowling and circling my legs all the way to the kitchen. I figured maybe he was still napping somewhere else in the house. When I checked later that evening, the bowl was empty. But once again, he did not come running when I refilled the dish. So this became our routine. I just scooped his portion, gave the bowl a shake to rattle the pellets around, and made myself scarce. It wasn't until I left the room that he would creep out of hiding and begin eating. I was glad to know he wasn't starving, at least, but I can't say I wasn't a little hurt. Next, I noticed how he acted around me. Before things changed, he would make himself at home on my lap every time I sat down to do some computer work or watch TV, rubbing his cheek against my face. It was almost irritating how affectionate that cat was. I miss it now. Starting that fateful Monday, whenever I'd enter a room, Gerald acted like some foreign threat had just entered the house. Fur spiked, back-arched, he would creep away at an angle, so as to keep me in his sight. Once, I tried to coax him out of his sudden terror with a handful of treats. As soon as I got within a foot of him, a low growl rose in his throat. He bolted into the next room, where I found him perched at the top of his cat tree, just out of my reach. He stayed up there for the rest of the night. I only heard him bumping around the house again once I'd gone to bed. I work as a university professor, so I'm usually gone for most of the day. If I know I'll be staying late to finish some grading or hold office hours, I'll often call up my sister, who I'll refer to as Laura, to ask if she or one of my nephews can drive over to check on Gerald. He's still an adolescent and full of energy. I worry about him getting bored and stir crazy when he's alone for too long. On Tuesday, I had back-to-back meetings after class, followed by a mountain of essays to grade. It was going to be a long day, so I called up Laura in the morning. She agreed without hesitation. "Don't stay too late tonight," she added. "You need to rest more, Cam." She was probably right. I hadn't been sleeping well recently. I had been suffering from vivid nightmares and sleep paralysis. At some point almost every night, a horrible compressing sensation would start in my chest and crawl up my throat. I'd wake up gasping for air. At the time, I chalked it up to a recent breakup and the stress of preparing my students for exam season. I was about to hang up when I remembered how strange Gerald had been acting. "By the way, Gerald's been kind of skittish recently," I added as I locked up the house and got into my car. "Don't be offended if he doesn't come out right away. Anyway, spare keys in the usual place. Let yourself in." I thanked her again and headed to work. Later that evening, just as I was leaving my last meeting, I noticed a new voicemail. It was from Laura. She sounded chipper as always, but I could tell she was choosing her words very carefully. "I know my sister. Something was off. Hey, Cammy. Just calling to say that the kitty's doing fine. The boys and I stopped by after school to play with him. He's such a joy. I wanted to ask something. Did you happen to stop by the house before your meetings today? We saw someone leaving out the back door as we were pulling up, but your car wasn't in the driveway. It's probably nothing, but I thought I'd ask. Have a good night." I felt a pang of anxiety in my chest. I hadn't been home since the morning. It could have been a delivery driver, but I wasn't expecting any packages. Maybe she'd seen my neighbor leaving their side of the duplex and mistaken it for mine. Laura hadn't mentioned anything being amiss inside, so it couldn't have been a burglar. I tried to convince myself of this, but the tension didn't leave my shoulders as I finished out the day and drove home. When I pulled into my driveway, all the lights were on inside. The kids probably forgot to turn them off when they left, I thought. I was still on edge. I crept up to the door slowly, listening for activity on the other side. I didn't hear anything at all. The quiet did nothing to comfort me. Usually Gerald would hear the rumble of my car and rush to the door or window to greet me on my way in. I was reaching for my keys when I heard it, a rattling. Good. I thought at first Gerald is eating something, but it was too purposeful to be a cat pushing pellets around. It was gentle, precise. A light shake followed by silence. Then it would repeat. Someone was rattling my cat's food dish. As quietly as I could manage, I put my keys down and crept over to the kitchen window. The curtains obscured most of my view, but through the sliver in between I could see a person standing there on the tiles, mostly turned away. As I suspected, they were hunched forward, holding out the metal cat dish and gently shaking it as to coax the cat out of hiding. Gerald was huddled in the corner of the kitchen, frozen in place. The stranger was barefoot, with long, matted hair that hung down their back in tangled clumps. Then I noticed what they were wearing. They had on nondescript, gray sweatpants, the kind I only wear when I have nowhere else to be. At first glance, their shirt was just a plain purple tee, but reading the bold white text on the back, my stomach dropped. It was my last name. That was my game shirt from last year's staff kickball tournament. The stranger in my kitchen was wearing my clothes. I sank down beneath the windowsill and dialed 911. I ran back to my car, locking myself inside as I waited for the operator to pick up. 911. What's your emergency? The woman on the line answered. There's someone in my house. I whispered, my throat closing up. Looking back, I should have thought to drive away at that point. But the truth is, I was more terrified for Gerald than myself. My cat was stuck in there with whoever was inside, and I had no idea what their intentions were. Ma'am, can you speak up? I managed to get my breathing under control. There's a stranger in my house, I said, keeping my voice low. Someone broke in. I stayed on the line for a few more minutes to give my address. As the responder took down my information, I felt a sickening sense of guilt. Gerald was still in there. I couldn't leave without him. Against all better judgment, I left my vehicle. I took a rusty shovel from the yard and approached the door, climbing the steps as silently as I could. I needed the element of surprise. Stealing myself, I kicked the door in, brandishing the shovel in front of me. The intruder did not flinch. They stood up straight, swaying unsteadily, and turned towards me. I couldn't help but think that they moved like a baby deer, legs wobbling, each step as slow and measured as if it was their first. As they twisted their heads in my direction, I finally caught sight of their faces. I saw myself. I don't know how else to say it. The stranger wore my face. The same nose, same dark brows, and thin lips. Even a small port wine stain on her, or my left cheek. The woman's eyes were wider and shinier than mine, though holding a blank, inscrutable expression I have only seen on prey animals or very young infants. For a split moment, I think I felt something like pity for this wretched creature. She looked so lost, and yet so viscerally, evolutionarily wrong. She opened her mouth as she saw me. She made a noise, something between a cry and a shout, a half-formed word meant for me. As she wailed, black bile dribbled down her chin. Then, all at once, she lurched towards me, hand outstretched, and grabbed my face. I felt searing pain as her long, unkempt nails dug into the skin of my cheek, puncturing it and dragging. I don't know what came over me then, perhaps some long-dormant survival instinct or panic response. All I can remember thinking is that this thing was not human and that it needed to get as far away from me as possible. I slammed the shovel into her chest with a sickening crack, yelling nonsense the way one yells at a bear to spook it from a campsite. Black bile splattered against my face and neck and the kitchen floor as I shoved her back. She wrestled with me, howling, trying to tear the shovel away. As she struggled, I could see an animalistic sort of fear well up within her glassy eyes. Then, as soon as she'd entered my life, the woman who wore my face turned and scampered from my home like a spurned animal, leaving the door swinging wide. I stumbled outside, just in time to watch her clamber over the chain-link fence, disappearing into the dark. After I was sure she had gone, I went inside to check on Gerald. He appeared unharmed, washing his paw casually as if nothing had happened at all. That is, until I got too close. He still doesn't trust me. I can tell. With great difficulty, I managed to get him into his cat carrier. Then I slapped a bandage over my bleeding cheek, threw a toothbrush and some clothes into a bag, grabbed Gerald's carrier, and left for my sister's place across town. Despite the short notice, Laura set up their fold-out couch for me as soon as I explained my night from hell. I even told her about the face. Though she didn't say a thing to discredit my story, I can tell that she thinks my interpretation of events is altered by stress and lack of sleep. I appreciate her listening anyway. She helped to examine and dress the wound on my left cheek, a gash just above my birthmark. It was deep, still oozing and hurt like hell. My assailant would have taken a whole half of my face if I hadn't warded her off in time. I'm sure of it. As for the stranger, I know she's out there somewhere. When the cops finally showed up at my home, though, I didn't find a thing. No trace of foreign DNA in my home. No tracks or damage left behind. This whole situation makes me feel crazy. I haven't been back since. I know I'll have to return eventually to collect my things. Until then, I've called in sick from work for the next few days to get my head on straight. I'm posting my story to this forum as a vent, I guess. A way to get out of my system. No one else believes me, but why would they? I can't think of a single rational explanation for what I saw that day. And as for Gerald, I've tried to make peace with him again. I stocked up on his favorite wet food, switched out his toys, and even bought some fresh catnip. The other day, he came close enough to sniff my hand. I'll call that a win. Otherwise, he's the same lovable ball of energy as always. He loves playing with Laura's kids and even the family dog. Still, the fact remains. My cat is afraid of me. Story 9. Once you hear it, you can't stop walking in a straight line. It started when I first heard the music. I'm not going to tell you how I came into possession of this particular music, nor am I going to tell you what it sounded like or anything particular about it, because even knowing these things can have an effect. All you need to understand is that this particular music, when I heard it, forced me to walk in a straight line. I was at home at the time in my London flat. I had started to listen to the song with my wireless headphones. As soon as the music started, I felt the itch to start moving. By then it was already too late. But I kept listening, not yet aware of the mistake I was making. And then, just as the first track neared its end, I rose from the sofa, turned and faced the wall, and started walking. Have you ever seen an NPC in a video game walk into a wall? Or a speedrunner trying to clip through a wall to get to areas of the game map they're not supposed to? I had walked over to the wall and onto the armchair, which kept me from the wall. After standing on the armchair, I just kept walking into the wall, knocking off a picture frame. The thing was, the music was fresh to my ears and still playing, so its effect was at its strongest. I was completely lucid of what I was doing, but that part of my brain that would signal for me to stop simply didn't exist anymore. The closest thing I could compare the feeling to is being in the throes of an addiction, whether it be pornography, or drinking, or even gambling. You know what you're doing isn't good for you, that you have to stop, but there's just something not there. The will, the care factor. Did it hurt to headbutt the picture frame of my recent university graduation photo off the wall? You bet. Did I care? Certainly. I wanted to stop with every fiber of my being, but I just simply couldn't. I kept going, walking against the wall, feeling the coarse wallpaper rubbing against my brow and rubbing at the skin. I think I lost a few eyebrow hairs in the process. In under a minute, I reached the corner of the living room. There should have been nowhere else to go, but stopping simply wasn't an option. I had hoped, though I couldn't stop, and I was pretty sure I was having some kind of stroke by this point, that reaching the wall would ease the burden to keep moving in a straight line. The thing was, I was already off the line, and it hurt, worse than any migraine, or worse than any flop sweat indigestion. And still the music continued to play in my head. I was on to the second track, but its effect was still the same. Keep moving. Stay in line. I reached for the door handle, found it locked, so I took a moment to unlatch it. Then the door opened, and I stepped out onto the small balcony, and I kept walking. This was where I feared I might walk straight off the balcony. Below there was a car, which I had to rapidly consider as the least worst option to jump down onto. Besides the car, which was a simple four-seater, all that remained was a drop which would likely break my ankles. That was when I discovered some freedom in my situation. I didn't have to simply fling myself over the balcony. There was no stopping, but I had a tiny bit of my brain to work with to decide how I would get back to the true line. Instead of just up and covering myself over the balcony railing, I stopped, climbed over carefully, and then did my best to control my fall onto the car. I landed with a thump, landing squat, and the car's alarm started going off. It was midday, so the odds of people nearby seeing what I had just done was high. Did I want them to see me do it? What they thought I was trying to do damage to the car on purpose. I moved down to the front of the car and slid down the front windscreen on my butt. I was wearing slippers when I started playing the music. They looked like large, fluffy monster paws. I was also wearing baggy PJ bottoms, a loose-fitting gray t-shirt with short sleeves, and a navy bathrobe which was currently untied. My mobile phone was tucked into my right bathrobe pocket, and I had the headphones on my head. The only other item of note on my person was my glasses. I'm nearsighted. On the ground, I just kept walking, moving diagonally across the estate. Should I shout for help? I thought. The music was so loud it was making it harder to think too. I thought about taking the headphones off, but the idea of doing so made me almost keel over and vomit. I passed 2 cars and the edge of a large estate building, and approached a small garden area with a path which led through to the middle part of another complex. I knew the true straight line would take me through the very thick green bushes ahead of me, but I found I could muster just enough willpower to walk onto the concrete path. It was like a bargain with whatever it was about the music that was forcing me to keep on the line. I'll return to the line immediately after. Just let me walk around, I thought. And I found I could do just that. I walked the path, stomping ahead in my big, goofy monster slippers, and kept going. This took me through a garden area and then into a small car park. It seemed at first the natural progression was to leave the car park through the way the cars would exit on the right. But that, I quickly discovered, was way too far from the true line. So, like when I had walked to the corner of my living room, I had to walk to the corner of the car park too. Throughout all this, I tried to understand why I couldn't find the will to take my headphones off, or to stop walking altogether. It didn't help that it felt amazing to stay on the true line. Better than taking off socks after a long day. Better than the first sip from a freshly cracked open can. Better than Friday night at the end of the work week. And that was just the start of my love of true line. At the corner of the car park, there was a small little hut-like structure. I walked to the edge of that, climbed over a metal railing. Then I walked through a small tunnel to the other side of the estate building. This put me onto the pavement on the other side. And then I walked into the road. The sudden horrible screech of car tires met my ears. I turned and saw a rotund, middle-aged woman in her car. "What are you doing?" she yelled out, though most of what I could hear was still being drowned out by the music. "I can't stop," I yelled back. This answer didn't seem to be good enough for the woman. She got out of her car and started walking towards me. "Stop! Come here," she yelled. "Stop!" I thought. The idea of stopping revolted me, but a part of me wanted to try. This woman was angry, sure, but what if I could get her to take the headphones off for me? Maybe they would give me back my right mind? But the closer she got to me, the more a nasty dread gripped me on the inside. Panic unlike anything I had ever felt before started to rise up within me. So much so that when the woman tried grabbing for my bathrobe, I let out a scream so loud I would have a sore throat for the rest of the day. I thrashed my arm back, and the woman stopped in her tracks, perplexed by my reaction. I started to jog, staying true to the line. The woman didn't give chase, but instead, the last I saw of her, she had her phone held to her ear. Calling the police? I wondered. Or, well, maybe her husband. I couldn't look back for long because I walked all the way down the road, crossed over to the other side of the street, and approached a large tree. "Please let me go round it," I pleaded inside my head. But I knew there was some wiggle room. As soon as I realized I could climb over the metal railing, thrash through the bush behind it, and then continue on, the fight in me to resist died out. I did just that and moved beyond the tree. This took me into the driveway of another estate building at the furthest corner of the whole complex. It seemed like a dead end because there were no gaps left. Right ahead, there was just a house. I wanted to stop, but couldn't find the will to do so. The 5th track from the music album, if you feel the need to get up from where you're sitting, that'll be because I just mentioned the music was part of an album. I'm sorry. I'll not mention any more about the music if it can be helped. So I continued on, and found myself standing outside the house in front of me. The front door just off to my right, the window into what might be the living room to my left. I had hardly any time at all to think about what I might do next. Every second I didn't move forward was like being trapped inside a hot car with the windows shut 100-fold. I tried the door handle to the house. No luck. I knew I didn't have the strength to kick the door down. But what else could I do? I saw in my mind's eye the solution. All I needed to do was drive my head through the window to my left. The glass would break if I hit it hard enough, wouldn't it? Some part of me was excited to try. Intrigued, even. I couldn't move forward on the true line if I didn't drive my head through the window pane. Please. I pleaded inside my head, please no. There was an awful cramp in my neck as I forced my gaze to the ground. There was a small stone turtle ornament next to the doormat. I picked it up, and, seeing as it was better than using my head, I smashed in the window with the stone turtle ornament. Move in, move in, move in. My body and mind pleaded with me. But I had just enough lucidity and self-control to use what wits I had left to strike away the sharper bottom and side edges of the window pane. And then I chucked the stone turtle ornament inside and climbed through the window. And it was after landing and getting to my feet that I noticed I had stopped moving. And there, on the carpet among the broken glass, were my headphones. The faint tinny sound of the music, on a new track. Again, I'm sorry that you've likely been counting the number of tracks which have been playing. I suggest you don't leave your home for the next few days because you might seek true line whilst driving or walking down the street. Please don't risk it. For a moment, I was filled with joy. The headphones were off. I was free, because without the music playing directly into my eardrums, how could it have control over me? To make sure I was free, I stomped on my headphones, my right foot aching from the force it took to render the headphones completely obsolete. I was stiflingly hot in my bathrobe, sweating and breathing huffing breaths. But in the silence of the house I had just broken into, I heard it. The music, playing inside my head. I'm sorry to tell you this. I really am. But the music is seriously catchy. I turned around to face the true line and kept walking. It's been a while since it all started. I'm posting this using my phone whilst on the move. I'll try and explain more, but many obstacles lay ahead. Story 10. The whole town goes outside during full moons, and what they're staring at isn't natural. My girlfriend Jordan and I moved to Roxborough Hollow 3 months ago. We thought we'd found paradise, a tiny town nestled in the Appalachian foothills, population 914, where you could rent a 2-bedroom house for what we'd been paying for a studio apartment back in Kansas City. More importantly, it was far enough from our families that they couldn't interfere with our plans to get married without the circus they all wanted. The real estate agent, a cheerful woman named Mrs. Wood, had shown us around town with obvious pride. Main Street stretched for exactly 4 blocks, lined with the kinds of shops you'd expect. Jacob's General Store, Mariah's Diner, a small post office, and an old-fashioned barbershop with a spinning pole. Everyone we met seemed genuinely friendly, the kind of place where neighbors actually knew each other's names. You'll love it here, Mrs. Wood had said as we signed the lease. Roxborough Hollow is very traditional. People here value their routines. We settled in quickly. I found work at the county's road maintenance department, and Jordan got a part-time job at the library. The pace of life was exactly what we'd hoped for. Slow, peaceful, predictable. For the first month, everything was perfect. Then came our first full moon. I should mention that our house sits on a small hill at the edge of town, with a clear view of Main Street and most of the residential area. Jordan loves to sit on our back porch in the evenings, and I'd gotten into the habit of joining her with a beer after work. The night sky was flawlessly clear at least once a month. It was during one of these quiet moments that we first witnessed what the locals simply call the watching. It started around 9 p.m. Jordan noticed it first. She'd been mid-sentence, telling me about some new books that had arrived at the library when she suddenly stopped talking. "Tony," she whispered, grabbing my arm. "Look." Down in the town, people were emerging from their houses, but they weren't walking normally. They moved with an odd, mechanical precision, their arms hanging straight at their sides, their heads tilted back at angles that made my neck hurt just looking at them. Men, women, children, Entire families filing out of their homes and gathering in the streets, their faces turned skyward. "What are they doing?" Jordan asked. I didn't have an answer. From our vantage point, we could see at least 50 people spread throughout the town, all standing perfectly still, all staring up at the stars. Their necks were craned back so far that it looked painful, unnatural. Some of the angles were so severe that I wondered how they could even breathe. "Should we go check on them?" Jordan asked, but something in her voice told me she really didn't want to. Neither did I. There was something deeply wrong about the scene below us. The way they stood, motionless as scarecrows, their faces pale in the moonlight. Even from a distance, I could see that their eyes were open unnaturally wide, like they were trying to take in as much of the sky as possible. We watched for nearly 3 hours. None of them moved except for the occasional slight adjustment of their head position, tracking something across the heavens that we couldn't see. No one spoke. No one even seemed to blink. Then, as suddenly as it had begun, it ended. Around midnight, they all turned and walked back to their houses as naturally as possible, disappearing inside. Within minutes, the town looked completely normal again. Jordan and I sat in stunned silence for a long time after that. "Did that really just happen?" she finally asked. The next morning, we debated whether to ask anyone about it. At Mariah's diner, our usual breakfast spot, everything seemed perfectly normal. Mariah greeted us with her usual smile, the coffee was hot, and the other customers chatted about mundane things. The weather, the upcoming church barbecue, someone's new partner. Finally, I worked up the courage to bring it up. "We noticed something interesting last night," I said to Mariah as she refilled our coffee. "It looked like the whole town was out stargazing." Mariah's smile brightened considerably. "Oh, you saw him too? Wonderful. Not everyone can see him clearly on their first viewing." "Imp?" Jordan asked. "The gazer," she said, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. "He appears on the full moon, right there on its surface. Such a blessing to witness." I exchanged a glance with Jordan, our brains both saying what the hell. We didn't really see anyone, just people looking up. "Give it time," Mariah said warmly. "Some folks need a few months before they can make him out properly. He's quite large, you know. Takes up most of the moon's face, even." We got similar responses everywhere we asked. At the general store, Mr. Patter described the giant as having kind eyes, though he admitted you had to look very carefully to see the features forming in the lunar craters. The librarian, Mrs. Chan, told Jordan that the gazer had been appearing to their community for generations, watching over them with paternal care. It was like the entire town had agreed on this vague, dismissive explanation and refused to elaborate. The next month, we were ready for it. We'd marked the calendar, noting that it had happened exactly on the night of the full moon. This time, we watched from the beginning. At 9:03 p.m., the first person emerged, old botanist Mr. Gareth from down the street. Then Mrs. Buckley with her twin boys. Then the Gibsons, the Kings, the family whose name we still didn't know from the blue house on Greenview Street. One by one, they came outside and took their positions. But this time we could see more details, and what we saw made my blood run cold. Their eyes weren't just wide open. They were open so far that I could see white all around the iris, like their eyelids had been pinned back. Their mouths hung, slightly open, and I swear I could see drool glistening on some of their chins. The children's necks were bent at angles that would have been agonizing if they'd been conscious. Their small heads tilted so far back that their faces were nearly parallel to the ground. "Tony," Jordan whispered, her voice shaking. "Look at their fingers." I followed her gaze and felt my stomach drop. Their hands weren't just hanging at their sides. Their fingers were spread wide, stretched so far apart that the skin between them looked painful and white. Some of them had their fingers bent backward at the joints, creating shapes that human hands weren't meant to make. I forced myself to look up at the moon, trying to see what they were all staring at so intently. At first, it just looked like a normal full moon to me, bright, round, crater-marked. But the longer I stared, the more I began to notice patterns in the shadows. The dark patches seemed to be moving, shifting, and rearranging themselves. What I'd initially dismissed as random crater formations began to look almost deliberate, like features trying to form. The longer I looked, the more convinced I became that there was something pulsing and tunneling just below the moon's surface. "Do you see it?" Jordan asked, her voice strange and distant. I did see it, or thought I did. A massive face taking shape in the moon's geography, with deep craters for eyes and what looked like mountain ranges forming the suggestion of a mouth. The face seemed impossibly large, as if something the size of a continent was pressing itself against the back of the moon, leaving impressions in the rock. "We need to call someone," I said, tearing my gaze away. "Who? The police? What'll we tell them? That our neighbors like to look at stars in uncomfortable positions?" We watched for 4 hours that night. The face in the moon seemed to become clearer as time passed, more defined, and I couldn't shake the feeling that it was looking back at us. Looking back at all of us. The third month, I made a decision that I now regret. I decided to get closer. Against Jordan's protests, I crept down the hill and hid behind the woods garden shed, about 20 feet from where Mrs. Wood herself stood with her husband and teenage daughter. From this distance, I could hear them. They were humming. It wasn't a melody exactly, but more like a constant low vibration that seemed to come from deep in their throats. The sound made my teeth hurt and sent shivers down my spine. But worse than the humming was the smell. They reeked of ozone. The odor was so strong it made my eyes water, and I had to breathe through my mouth to keep from gagging. I watched Mrs. Wood's face from the side. Her eyes had rolled back so far that only the whites were visible, and the veins in her neck stood out like thick ropes. Her daughter, who couldn't have been more than 16, was making small clicking sounds with her tongue in rhythm with the humming. That's when I noticed the footprints. In the soft dirt of the woods flower bed, I could see dozens of footprints from previous months, but they were wrong. They were too deep, pressed into the earth as if the people making them weighed far more than they should. I looked up at Mrs. Wood again, and this time I focused on her bare feet. Her toes were extended, clawing at the ground, and they seemed to be bulging and getting longer as I watched. Then I made the mistake of looking up at the moon. The face was clearer now, more defined than it had been from our distant porch. I could see what looked like enormous eyes formed by the sea of tranquility and the sea of serenity, with the lunar highlands creating the impression of a broad forehead. The dark patches that formed the mouth seemed to be moving, opening and closing in rhythm with the townspeople's humming. Movement. But worse than that, I was convinced it was looking directly at me. Those vast crater eyes seemed to focus on my hiding spot behind the shed, and I felt a pressure in my skull, like something massive and alien trying to push its way into my thoughts. The face in the moon tilted slightly, and I swear I could see what looked like a smile forming in the arrangement of shadows and ridges. A knowing, predatory smile that seemed to say, "I see you there, little watcher. Soon you'll join them." I'd seen enough. I crept back up the hill, my heart pounding so hard I was sure the whole town could hear it. Then I'd really be screwed for interrupting their fucked-up ritual. "We're leaving," I told Jordan as soon as I got back to the porch. "We're packing tonight, and we're gone by morning." But Jordan was staring down at the town with a strange expression on her face. "Tony," she said softly, "do you hear that?" I stopped and listened. The humming was audible even from our house now, a low, thrumming vibration that seemed to come from everywhere at once. But there was something else, a higher pitch, almost musical, weaving in and out of the deeper sound. "It's beautiful," Jordan whispered. I grabbed her shoulders and turned her to face me. Her pupils were dilated, and she was swaying slightly on her feet. "Jordan, we need to go inside. Now." She blinked slowly, and for a moment, her eyes focused on mine. "Yes," she said. "Yes, you're right." We went inside, and I closed all the curtains, turned on the TV loud enough to drown out the humming. Jordan seemed to snap out of whatever trance had been affecting her, but the experience left us both shaken. We tried to leave the next morning. I loaded our belongings into the car, while Jordan handled the last-minute details, like canceling our utilities and dropping off the house key. But when I went to start the engine, nothing happened. The car was completely dead. Mr. Jacobs from the general store happened to be walking by. "Car trouble?" he asked cheerfully. "Won't start," I said. "The engine won't even turn over." "Oh, that happens sometimes around here. Something about the elevation, or maybe the mineral content in the ground. Plays havoc with electronics. I'll call Matt's garage for you." Matt couldn't get to us until the following week. His explanation was identical to Mr. Jacobs. Something about the local environment affecting car batteries and electrical systems. He needed to order parts. We're still waiting for those parts. It's been 2 weeks since our failed escape attempt, and I'm writing this during the day because I know what's coming tonight. It's almost time for the full moon again, and I can already feel something changing in the air. The humming starts earlier each month, so faint during the day that you might mistake it for tinnitus or distant machinery. Jordan hears it too, but she doesn't seem bothered by it anymore. Yesterday, I caught her standing on our back porch, her head tilted slightly upward, her eyes closed, and a peaceful expression on her face. "Just listening to the music," she said when I asked what she was doing, "and waiting for him to show himself again. Mariah says he's been especially clear lately. I don't hear any music. I only hear that terrible humming, growing louder as the sun sets. And I refuse to look at the moon anymore, not after seeing that malevolent intelligence staring back at me from its surface. Tonight is the 4th full moon since we arrived in Roxborough Hollow. I've barricaded myself in our bedroom with the radio turned up loud and towels stuffed under the door. Jordan is somewhere else in the house. She said she wanted to get some fresh air about an hour ago. I can hear footsteps on our front porch now, slow and deliberate. The humming is so loud it's making the windows vibrate. And underneath it all, I can hear Jordan's voice calling my name. But it doesn't sound like Jordan anymore. Her voice is too deep, too resonant, like it's coming from somewhere much larger than her throat. "Tony," she calls. "Come outside. You need to see this. You need to see what's up there." The footsteps are moving around the house now. I can track them as they circle from the front porch to the side yard, then around to the back. But there are too many of them. It sounds like a dozen people walking around our house, all in perfect synchronization. "Tony, the stars are so beautiful tonight. Don't you want to see the stars?" That's not Jordan's voice. I don't know whose voice it is, but it's coming from right outside my window. The humming is getting louder. I can feel it in my bones now, vibrating through the floor and up into my chest. The radio isn't helping anymore. The sound seems to be coming from inside my own head. I think I understand now why no one in town wants to talk about the watching. It's not because they're embarrassed or secretive. It's because they don't remember it happening. Whatever takes them over during those nights, it leaves them afterward, and they go back to their normal lives with nothing but vague impressions and an agreed-upon story to tell curious newcomers. But I remember everything I've seen, and I know that whatever's out there in the sky, whatever comes for them every month, it's not going to let me leave Roxborough Hollow. Not now that I know. The footsteps have stopped. The humming is so loud now that I can't think straight. And Jordan, or the thing that sounds like Jordan, has stopped calling my name. I can hear the front door opening. If anyone finds this, don't come looking for us. Don't come to Roxborough Hollow. And whatever you do, don't look up at the stars when the moon is full. Some things are better left unwatched.